morning, everyone. My name is Caitlyn, and this morning I will be presenting on the continued commodification of the child in the 21st century, primarily from a theoretical children's rights perspective. But before I begin my presentation in earnest, I thought I would just give a little bit of information about myself and my current projects. So I did my Bachelor of Laws and my Master of Laws at the University of Stellenbosch. There I'm currently doing my Doctor of Laws, or my LLD, and I'm studying the evolving capacities of the child through an intersectional lens. What that really, that convoluted sentence means is that basically, I am studying how the evolving capacities of the child can secure better outcomes in the lived experience of children who've been subjected to situations of powerlessness or marginalization.
Caitlyn, can I just interrupt and say we've got a French translator who's translating you. We'll slow down a little bit.
Okay, perfect, will do. Je suis désolée. Today I will be presenting on an article that I wrote in my own personal capacity for the Daily Maverick, and this was also subject to discussion on Cape Talk. Basically what this article centered on was the continued commodification of children, particularly in light of the Jocelyn Smith saga. But before we really delve into that, just a brief outline of what today's presentation will entail. Essentially, I'm going to look at the historical lines of thinking which have contributed towards the commodification of children in the 21st century. So this will be looking at seeing the child as property and seeing the child as, failing to see the child as an individual rights bearer. So since her disappearance in February, the green eyes of Jocelyn Smith have come to the nation, and her image has become projected on all of our screens. The complications of this case have become twisted into the likes of a cautionary Grimming tale, as Jocelyn's own mother and others have been accused of trafficking and selling her daughter, allegedly for booty. The quest to find Jocelyn has forced investigators and community members to confront the unthinkable as they've combed through communities, isolated locations, and even cargo ships to find any trace of the little girl, all to no avail. Naturally, like my fellow South Africans, I have become gripped by the horrors of this case and the spectre of what may have occurred to this child. It was reading an update on this case that I was reminded of a theory by the renowned sociologist Viviana Zelizer, who I had come across in the depths of my own research. In a quote, she unequivocally states, from the mid-19th century and until the 1930s, the status of the child dramatically metamorphosed from being the commercially valuable chattel or the property of their parents into beings of economic worthlessness, but emotional pricelessness. This quote seems to suggest that the commodification of the child came to an abrupt end just over a generation ago, but Jocelyn's case shows us that this is not so, as but one horrifying example of the commodification and exploitation of children taken to its extreme. History has shown us that the commodification of children and the treatment of them as the property of parents has ancient roots, which has expanded into most pre-industrial societies. Even as rights slowly grew for adults from the commencement of the modern period onwards, the tradition of perceiving children as chattel continued. Research shows that this is the result of two factors, namely the continued perception of children as chattel or property of their parents, as well as an inability to perceive children as individual rights holders beyond the confines of a family unit. However, before I go into these historical examples, which act as the materialization of these views, we should first look at the thoughts of the scholar Oswald, who posits children's being, their positionality, and their cultural form are the consequence and effects of institutional power, discourse, and cultural negotiation and contestation. If we think carefully then, we need to ask ourselves, who actually is the child? So here we see a picture from the cave paintings in Bahia, California, and it's called La Palma. So it has been carbon dated to around 11,000 years ago. So even from then, we can see from the diminutive figure in the front there that we have always had a distinction between adult and child. So in medieval age, they said that there was no distinction between adult and child because everyone was too fixated on trying to survive crop failures and this greater series of plagues. However, this is not true. For if you were to travel back to medieval times, you would refer to the child as either puer, net, fante, vaslet, or infans, all of which derive from the Latin term impubes, infans, and puer, which would refer to the diminutive state of the child, as well as their apparent state of incompleteness. An early example, which admittedly draws a crude line between adults and child, was seen in the Anglo-Saxon King Athelstan's laws, and this is from 927 to 939 AD, where he made the proclamation that the death penalty for offences such as theft were altered to the age of 12 years old because you were presumed to have known better. In the 17th century, a child could bizarrely be defined as, and I quote, the filthy bundle of original sin of the parents. But luckily, in the 20th century, legal frameworks came into existence which sought to define who the child is. For example, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which I will just refer to as the CRC from here on out, for the sake of brevity, which should act as the very blueprint which is consulted whenever we speak of children, defines the child in Article 1 as every human being below the age of 18 years, unless under the law applicable to the child, majority is attained earlier. Concurrently, the preamble or the opening statement of this convention recognizes that the child is someone by who, by reason of his physical and mental immaturity, needs special safeguards and care, including appropriate legal protection before as well as after birth. The African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, which was produced by the African Union as a response to the unique nature of children's rights issues within our continent, takes a stricter position and states that, for the purposes of this charter, a child means every human being below the age of 18 years, and accordingly provides that the child, due to the needs of the physical, mental development, requires particular care with regard to health, physical, mental, moral, and social development, and requires legal protection and conditions of freedom, dignity, and security. Yet, despite the existence of these legal frameworks, we can see that the discriminatory and objectifying language of the past has continued to creep in when we talk about children. So this was particularly prevalent during the COVID-19 pandemic, where some sources that were published define children as vectors, not victims. The point I'm therefore trying to make is that the objectification and exploitation of children begins with how we understand the child and how we define them and their rights within a particular society. This is recognized in the work of the children's rights academic Jonathan Todres, who states that children and people in general, while claiming and putting notions of rights into practice, help shape what these rights are and become in the social world. This means that children's rights already exist in practice before they are translated into legal principles and are therefore not the mere product of philosophical, political, and legal deliberation or international institutions or states. So if we move on to the child as property. So children...
Caitlyn, could I just ask that you just give a gap at the end of each paragraph and then our translator will be able to catch up.
Sure. So we're now moving on to children as property. So traditionally, children were regarded as nothing more than the property of their parents, property which could be disposed of with relative ease. And the most often cited archetype is that of the Roman paterfamilias, the father who was the head of the family who had the right of killing his children and slaves alike. So the most common justification for the invocation of this complete power was in the context of infant exposure in antiquity and the father's recognition of the child. Euripides states that during this time, infants were thrown into rivers, flung into dung heaps and cess trenches, potted in jars to starve to death, and exposed on every hill and roadside. Thus, any child that was viewed as weakly or abnormal in some sense was discarded, as were healthy children on account of their sex or legitimacy. This rationale behind this abhorrent practice was illustrated by Lucius Annius Seneca, a Latin Stoic, who stated in his essays concerning favours bestowed upon the child by their parents. But if merely being alive is the least important factor in living well, and you have bestowed upon me the very thing which I share with wild beasts and the smallest creatures, even some of the vilest, do not give yourself credit for something which you did not arise from, even if it could not have risen without any favour of yours. So, as we can see, the opinion of the ancients was that the birth of a child was merely a rudimentary step within the greater tapestry of one's life, and the child had no perceived, if the child had no perceived value by their father's assessment, then they could simply be discarded with the rubbish. This ludicrous notion that children were merely the property of adults continued well into the 17th century and onwards, even as rights slowly grew for adults from the commencement of the modern period onwards. This is seen into the foundation of colonial America, for example, when the Virginia Company forcefully took about 100 of London's homeless children to be apprentices within the Virginia colony. The Privy Council also granted the Virginia Company the right that, if any of them shall be found to be obstinate, to resist or otherwise to disobey such directions as shall be given in its behalf, we do likewise hereby authorize such that shall have the charge of the servant to imprison, punish, and dispose of any of these children. At the same time, English common law dictated that the father had the right to the association and services of all his legitimate children, which meant that he was automatically entitled to the physical custody over his children and could bring third parties to the court if they had diminished the child's future perceived value. So, for example, if someone had wrongfully seduced the daughter and had diminished her value, the father could take that third party to court for that diminished value. Additionally, if an employer had enticed the child to go away from home and to take their future earnings away with that child, then the father could also bring a suit against that third party. Yet, I think the most, possibly the worst treatment of the child as property or as a res came in the 18th century in Georgian England, where there was a case where a woman was systematically blinding children so that they would act as beggars for her. And it was then brought to court and she was given a fine. It was noted by the author Michael Freeman that if she had done this to her own children, there would have been no fine applied. And if she had done this to someone else's sheep, if she had systematically blinded someone else's sheep, she would have had the death penalty. So that just shows how we have commercially viewed children. Another famous case was that of Mary Ellen Wilson in the late 19th century New York. So she was successfully rescued from the abusive mistreatment of her foster parents by the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. So this act was born from a very contorted perception of Darwinian thought, which viewed children as one of the little animals who had the same social currency as beasts such as pigs, horses, and cattle. It was only after this instance that the New York Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children was founded. So to me, this was very redolent of the quote by the doctor and the author Janusz Korczak, who said in the early 20th century, "Motherhood enables a woman, if she is capable of sacrifice and self-denial, is demoralizing if under the guise of caring about the well-being of the child, she makes him prey of her ambitions, likes, and addictions. My child is my property, my slave, my little pet dog." So the second branch, which we are going to explore now, is the child as being excluded from acting as an individual rights bearer. So this has also lent itself towards the continued commodification of children, as the interests of the child have often been subsumed within broader group interests or within the interests of the parents. So DeMaus historically suggests that this was not it was not love that the parents of the past lacked, but rather the inability for parents of this time to see the child as distinct from themselves. So this has been attributed to the psychological reversal reaction to how children are perceived, where the adult uses the child to replace an adult figure in their own lives. So this is noted to be a reaction which is most commonly used by people who continually beat their children, and that they have the mantra that children exist only to satisfy parental needs. So this very much is like in the line of thought of this is going, like when the parent does beat the child, it's very much in the line of this is going to hurt me more than this hurts you. And this is based off Renaissance thought. And on the other hand, other authors such as Blackstone and Kent reason that the amalgamation of separate identities within the family unit and placing adult power in the fore is due to the fact that the law's traditional notion of the family rested on the presumption that the child's parents possess what a child lacks in maturity, experience, and capacity for judgment required in making life's difficult decisions. So here we've been using competence as a bulwark from excluding children from acting as individual rights bearers. So this is very much in line with the sentiments of Thomas Hobbes, a 17th century philosopher who's considered one of the first architects of modern political philosophy, and we still very much follow his teaching. But he stated in his seminal work, which is called Leviathan, that like the imbecile, the crazed, and the beasts, over children there is no law. So, to the modern eye, all of these examples seem really shocking, but they naturally ask us, like they make us pose the question, are we any better? And the answer, unfortunately, has to be no, and this is in spite of the legal frameworks that we have in place, who make the position about how we ought to treat children abundantly clear. So, for example, if we do look back to the CRC, it is the most highly ratified international instrument in history, and it boasts 196 signatories, with the exception of the United States, of course. All of these signatory states, particularly those who have brought the provisions of the convention into their own legal systems, have undertaken to maintain the promise to recognize that the child should be fully prepared to live an individual life in society and brought up in the spirit of the ideals proclaimed in the Charter of the United Nations, and in particular, in the spirit of peace, dignity, tolerance, freedom, equality, and solidarity. So this promise is manifested throughout several articles of the Convention, which I will briefly gloss over. So the first article that I would like to bring your attention to is Article 2. So basically, Article 2 of the CRC is the clause against prohibiting discrimination against the child. So I would like to draw your attention to the final phrase at the end of Article 2 there, which says or other status. So that is purposefully wide enough to include prohibition of discrimination on the child based on other factors such as age or status as a child. So it is important then to remember in this context that discrimination and exploitation are not mutually exclusive, but they operate often in tandem with other factors such as dehumanization. So this is very evident when we look at the reality of discrimination itself, which occurs when a person is denied the opportunity to enjoy or exercise their human rights due to an unjustified distinction in the way that they are treated. So then we look at Article 3.1 of the CRC. So this one is a very significant article, and it is one of the pillars of this instrument. And it contains the principle that we call the best interests of the child. So this is a highly significant provision, as I've stated, as it calls on all social actors, be they parent or policymaker, to ensure the physical, psychological, moral, spiritual integrity, and human dignity of the child is upheld in all situations. So Here on the continent, we actually take this more seriously because in Article 4.1 of the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, it is the best interest of the child will not be a one in a series of important factors. It will be the primary consideration in all matters pertaining to the child. So the strength of this provision is recognition. It's the recognition in its preamble of the African Charter that the situation of the African children remains critical due to the unique factors of their socio-economic, cultural, traditional, and developmental circumstances, natural disasters, armed conflicts, exploitation, and hunger, and on account of the child's physical and mental immaturity. He or she needs special safeguards and care. So another illustration of the significance of this provision is that it's actually become a constitutional right in South Africa. So we have it in section 28.2 in the Bill of Rights, which states a child's best interests are of paramount importance in every matter concerning the child. So then we see Article 6.2 of the CLC, which pertains to the life, survival, and development of the child. So it calls upon states to create an environment conducive to ensuring the maximum extent possible the survival of the child. And this will be interpreted against Article 3.1. So if we go on to the next set of articles, so we have Article 32.1, which prohibits the economic exploitation of the child. Then there's Article 34, which prohibits the sexual exploitation of the child. And then Article 35, which prohibits the abduction, sale, or trafficking of the child, and Article 36, which protects the child against all other forms of exploitation. So I would just like to take a moment to focus on Article 36. So not only does it prohibit all forms of exploitation which have already been mentioned in the convention, but it also, again, is purposely left to be very open, so to include other forms of exploitation which may be created or that don't fit necessarily into the convention itself. So various authors and institutions have interpreted exploitation in the sense to include political issues, exploitation by the media, researchers for medical or scientific experimentation, and exploitation which may be the result of the child's own talents, which may lead them to be deprived of other important aspects of childhood. So there we're looking at child actors and children on social media as well. So in order to strengthen these provisions, it's not on the slides, but it's fine. We have the optional protocol on the Convention on the Right of the Child, on the sale of children, child prostitution, and child pornography, which prohibits the sale of children, child prostitution, and child pornography. So this instrument also interestingly comprehends that how exploitation of children can have many causes, and therefore believes that the elimination of the sale of children, child prostitution, and child pornography will be facilitated by adopting a holistic approach, addressing the contributing factors including underdevelopment, poverty, economic disparities, inequitable socio-economic structure, dysfunctioning families, and etc. So it lists all the factors which need to be looked at under this holistic approach. So if we have these very strict legal frameworks in place, the question is, why are we actually having this discussion today? Why is the commodification of the child continuing? So we see that the IOM estimates that not only is a child 4 more times to be trafficked by an adult, but a staggering 41% of these children would have been trafficked by a close family member or relative. Of the children who are trafficked, the IOM further reports that 43.4% of the victims were trafficked for the purpose of forced labor, 20.8% were trafficked for sexual exploitation, and a smaller percentage were trafficked for both. With regards to children who were trafficked for forced labor, 14.5% were used for domestic work, 10.2% were forced to act as beggars, 3.4% were in the hospitality industry, and 3.3% were placed in the agricultural industry. And of the children that were trafficked, 56.9% were trafficked within the borders of their own countries. So the perpetrators of these offences aren't necessarily just the parents of the child, but we also see that it can be the community members of the child that have trafficked the child. So for example, we would have a case in South Africa where last year the elderly members of a community in Imbizana were charged with trafficking a mentally disabled 13-year-old girl who was later raped and then forced into marriage. As I mentioned earlier, we are also seeing new forms of exploitation coming to the fore, particularly when we're looking at digital technology. So we see that children now are being exploited on these platforms, particularly by the parents, as they exchange content of their children, which is often done without the consent of the child in exchange for sponsorship and likes. In warring regions of the world, particularly in the African context, it was estimated that there were over 105,000 child soldiers who were exploited during ongoing hostilities. They were exploited for their vulnerability or recruited by force. Children are not only constantly used as dispensable combatants on the front lines, but they are also made to engage in hazardous labor in camps. Girl children who are exposed to conflict are exceptionally vulnerable in these circumstances, as they are at risk of being victims of rape or gender-based violence. So as we can see, we have these strong frameworks, but there is still a gap. So the examples of the commodification of children here certainly vary in their degree, but they are united by the same attitude towards children, which regards them as objects, less than fully human. Our laws may be excellent, but they are not enough. The real problem lies with ourselves and the way that we think about children. Children are not the means to adult ends, nor can their innate worth be translated into human-made currency. Jocelyn Smith's case is extreme, but the same archaic, even subconscious attitude of treating children as property is deeply ingrained in our society, even if we don't fully recognize this or accept it within our own thought patterns. Therefore, we need to ask ourselves, how do we respond to the challenge of fully realizing children's rights? How will we give them the opportunity to flourish in physical and psychological safety as the emotionally priceless beings that they actually are? So my opinion may be utopic in nature, but as one academic, Dr. Adam Barnum, postulates, utopianism is possibly the only way that we can combat the commodification of the child, seeing the positive from the negative. So I think this is indeed possible, for we have seen throughout this presentation, the expression of the child's identity is a societal construct and therefore can be subject to further positive change. As engineers of this change, we need to turn the tide on a grassroots level and reconstruct the image of the child so that it is in alignment with the rights that we have discussed here today. The child needs to be perceived as an essential, constant presence within the tapestry of society, who ought to be afforded the same level of respect, which is befitting of their status as a rights holder, as a human being. So in closing, I would just like to leave you once more with the statement by Janusz Korczak, where he observes that there appears to be two lives, one serious and respectable, the other indulgently tolerated, less valuable. We say a future person, a future worker, a future citizen, that children will be, that they will really begin to be serious only in the future. Children are not a casual encounter who can be passed hurriedly by or dismissed with a smile and a hello. Children have been, are, and they will be. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. There's a lot in there. I think we'll need to get a copy of the paper and take some time to absorb all of it. Thank you very much. I'm going to go straight on to Maria, and then when Maria's presentation is finished, we'll open it up for comments and discussion and so on.
All right, thank you.
Right.
I have some training slides that I use my teaching. I'll share them later, but I just thought for purposes of today, we'll just talk through it. And I think it has been a very good foundation for the talk. I was telling her before we moved in here that I often enjoy going to Stellenbosch for the social justice conference that former public protector advocate Madonsela organizes, because I usually get invited to speak on components of children's rights at those conferences. And part of why I got excited about this was it's quite auspicious that we're doing this now in the month of June for a couple of reasons. First of all, we just completed the elections in South Africa. We're still waiting for the outcomes, right? Because in the last conference, one of the things that came up, we were talking about reasons why nothing is happening while we're having these discussions and governments don't seem to be taking, putting their money where their mouth is. And we're talking about the old arguments about we don't have enough resources, and all of those things are always coming up whenever we talk about concerns of children. And I made an example. I said, wait, if we were having elections now, and for some reason, something went wrong with the elections. It doesn't matter that we've been planning for the past 7 years for this one day, the elections, and we've spent billions and billions of rands, right, on having the elections. If something happened one day and certain people, maybe in certain quarters or a party or whatever it is, are not satisfied with the outcome, and they are able to convince a large swath of people, they could decide, let's have another elections. And for one moment, no one would think about the cost. Why? There are selfish interests involved. But when it concerns these precious ones, as children and all of those things, we always have a million and one excuses about, oh, why we can't do this, why we can't have more schools, why we can't stop having more schools, why we can't, have provisions for children with disabilities. There are always all of those excuses. They keep coming up over and over again. So I found it very interesting to see that. And now you even have some people in the discussions we are having now in the South African context. You even hear things like that, oh, maybe the election should be rerun. And I'm like, that's exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about the concerns of people, human beings. How do we advance their socioeconomic conditions? Then we raise issues of resource. Or when we have economic or political interest, nobody remembers that there are economic constraints.
Can I just remind you about the interpreter?
Yes.
Slow down.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so the second reason why it's also interesting that we're having it in June is obviously we know that in the South African context, we have our annual celebration of Youth Day, right, on the 16th of June. But I don't know how many of us are aware that at the African Union level, it is also known as the Day of the African Child. And it's drawn again from the South African history of the 1976 Soweto uprising. So every year, there is a focus on a particular theme that is relevant to children. And there is a commemoration. It's decided, the venue is decided upon, depending on which state parties indicate interest. And that particular theme is put into a key focus, and state parties have to give information at the African Union level. What are we doing in this area? What are the challenges? What are the gaps? And beyond that, what are the steps you're going to take to plug in those gaps? And the committee will then decide these are the follow-up steps that we're going to take to hold you to account for the commitments that you have made. So on the 15th and 16th of this month, for example, where we'll be celebrating Youth Day here, at the African continental level, it will be the Day of the African Child. And the theme this year is on education for children. And the emphasis is now, it has to be now, because we are trying to deal with this whole matter of what Caitlyn was saying. We have this romanticized way of, oh, the children are the leaders of tomorrow. Everything is about tomorrow. Everything is leaders of tomorrow, futures of tomorrow. Oh, your time is tomorrow. But there is no tomorrow if today is not guaranteed, right? There's no tomorrow if you don't put in place the things you need now. So I often tell my students, especially the older ones, that I even for myself, I don't think there's anybody who the day you turned 18, some switch went off in your head. Now I'm adult, I can do. It doesn't happen that way. It's still a transitional process. All of life is like that. Even as adults, we are continuously figuring things out. Some of the things are battles or demons that adults battle with. Some of the things are issues that came from childhood that were not dealt with or resolved. So to think of children only as people who will begin to matter at some future, uncertain future date, is in itself not even honest, right, as human beings. So like she rightly said, children are not appendages of their parents. Even Justice Albisac said it in one of his seminal judgments. They are not destined to sink or swim, with their parents' destinies. They are individuals in and of themselves. And the understanding of this is one of the reasons why the CRC, like she said, till date is the most ratified human rights instruments, because all the states for once would agree, okay, this matter is important, we don't need to talk about it too much, we don't need to argue and debate, we need to put protections in place for the children. And virtually all the states ratified it without arguments, like she said, of course, with the US. And I think at some point there was Somalia also, but that was the issue, was because there was no functioning government to ratify. But with the US, you have all the arguments about, one, we have our own systems, which is not true, that are better, which is not true. But you also have, sadly, in my opinion, religious arguments, those who believe that, they think that when you talk about protecting children, for some reason, you are attacking parents and their rights, which is not the case, right? And they also don't like to be honest about the fact that you have many states in the US, for example, where child marriage is an issue, right? Children, people, especially girls, are being married at a very early age. Then also questions of children in the justice system. Children are incarcerated at alarming rates, and oftentimes they are not necessarily kept separately or treated separately from adults, right? So you would think that because it's the United States, it's so wonderful. It's not true. The reality on the ground is actually quite different. So those are some of the factors that continue to, hamper the ratification on that side. And in those instruments, whether it's the Convention on the Rights of the Child, CRC, or the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, which we often call the African Children's Charter for short, the agreement is, there are those principles that Caitlyn laid out nicely. We cannot talk about the right to life for children without talking about the conditions that make life worth living, right? So your health, provisions, all the things that you need, food, nutrition, water, and the rest to make life meaningful, especially in the case of children. That's why we talk about milestones like the first 100 days. That's why we have different kinds of immunization you take at a certain period, the moment a child is born. Again, I often tell my students, if I were to have a baby today and we were all gathered here, let's say for a moment, this is the baby, and one after the other, everyone comes, oh, he's so cute, oh, she's so cute, oh, nice, and you're all like, thank you, oh, this, and I'm like, thank you, and one after the other, you all work out. And at the end of the day, I also work out and we all leave the baby here. What's going to happen with the baby? Yes, my sister, what's going to happen to the baby?
That's the baby will survive.
Exactly, because it's not enough that the baby is born. At the point in which you're born, you have life, you're breathing. But then after that, what happens, right? So the baby needs all of the support, all of the materials and the things that will make the baby actually not only live, survive, and actually thrive and develop, right, to the fullest maximum level possible. So those are the things. In the context of children, they are particularly urgent because, like we say, before you know it, childhood flies by. Any parent here can tell you, you can still remember. When did I have, I'm sure your mom, if I were to ask her, and now she's like, okay, I'm your driver. It flies by. The time just flies by. So for children, it's even much more urgent when we do all of those things. So life, survival, development, their best interest. But again, what determines best interest is, it's always fluid, right? So in the children's rights context, we say it's context specific. What is best for child A is not necessarily what is best for child B. So you have to take all of those circumstances into consideration. I often give an example. In one of the cases we were involved with, was a child who was a victim of abuse, I think by the mother's boyfriend. So there was a living situation. She was about 6 or 8. And obviously when the information got to the social workers, the child had to be removed. So the decision was now about placement in alternative care while thinking of what to do for that child. But now at the time, in the thinking of those in the children's rights sector, the understanding was, we want to put all children in family environments. So people were like stigmatizing placement in institutions. We don't want any kind of institution at all. But then the problem becomes, we put this child in one home of foster parents. And as social workers, you have to go back and check and to update what's the situation of the child now. And there was no improvement in the child's condition. She was still in trauma. She was still shocked. You could see that she was just not coping. The thinking was, maybe these are not the right parents, right? So we change the home, another home, another foster parents. Same story. This happened about 3 times. And I was like, okay, now we need to go back to the drawing board and say something is not working here. What is the problem? By the time we were digging in and trying to engage the child, deal with the child, what was happening? Remember, this is a child between 6 and 8. In the mind of this little girl, in a home, anybody who she's supposed to call daddy is somebody who does bad things to her. So anywhere we put her, she sees another daddy, she's on edge. She's just waiting. When is this daddy going to harm me? Because that's what she experienced in the home she was taken from. That was our aha moment. That, okay, what we were thinking, this child, we cannot help her if we put her in a home. So for that child, what worked best was actually a neutral setting, like an institution where there's no, this is daddy, this is not, this is mommy, just a place while we're putting in place programs of psychosocial therapy and all of those things, just to help the child cope and heal before then thinking of transitioning back to your typical kind of format of the family arrangement. So in that child's case, it wasn't in her best interest to just take her from that environment and put her in another home. So when we talk about best interest of the child, you have to think about best interest of each child, this child. What is best for this child is not necessarily what is best for the next. So all of those factors have to go into the consideration. And that leads me to child participation. Again, as adults, we talk a lot about children, but we always say, where are the children themselves? Where are their voices? Have you asked them what they think about these things that we say? We assume that we know. I give you another example. In the context of one of the things we're dealing with at the African Committee level, we've been talking about children's rights in the digital space. But you find that so many people, especially the older ones, they're only interested in, they're worried about all the negatives. Oh, pornography, all of those things, grooming of children, online exploitation, and all of those things are true. But we cannot throw the baby out with the bathwater. Why? If we want to put our children in the name of protecting them, they're not able to learn, they're not able to advance, then how will they compete or compare favorably with their peers in other places in the world? Now, again, in the context of COVID-19, many parents, many of us, when we started having to work from home, I remember in my case, I was struggling, Zoom and all of it. It's the children who were teaching me, no, it's like, oh, okay. They were born into this. That's their language. So I learned a lot of things from the children. So I'm like, okay, these are the experts in this thing. So I'm like, in the digital spaces, you cannot exclude them. It's their language. They are the digital natives, like we call them. So whatever we're doing, we must think about them. What are they saying about this? I'm reminded of Namibia because I was paying attention to some of the countries that were mentioned as being here. I remember in the context of Namibia, we still cite it as a best practice example because when they were going to develop their law, their national law on children, the children were very much involved. At that time, we didn't have WhatsApp, but Facebook was the in thing at the time. So they had different groups for them, different categories of the law. If it's about corporal punishment, when you disobey, when you do something wrong, how should we treat you? What should be done? Or do you think you can do whatever you like? And you would find that almost all the children said, no, when you do something wrong, there should be consequences. It was the children who were saying it. But now it's how do we handle the consequences? So you could see their inputs, every single section in that final document had the input of children. So we still always cite it as a good example of how you bring children, because this is about children. So we should also hear them. What do they have to say about these matters? And she's talked about non-discrimination. I don't need to go back to that. But again, to add on to evolving capacities, all of these rights of children, especially these four that we call the core principles of children's rights, we always underscore them with what is known as the evolving capacities of the child, that Caitlyn rightly mentioned. Why is that? We can have the same range of rights for children, but obviously, when you're thinking of policy making, programmatic inputs and all the rest, the way you target the same rights for children who are 7-year-old will not be the same for 16, right? The levels of involvement are different. So for instance, the same way you want to be so into your daughter's life or your son's life at 7, 16, it's your son or your daughter. Mom, get out of my room. It's like, by that, so you're not, okay, he's evolving, he's growing. So the level of independence is growing. So the attachment you have also has to reduce because you are recognizing the personhood of that individual. This is not just a little cute baby. No, this is now an individual with his own mind, his own thinking, his own ideas, and all of those things. So we always stress how the evolving capacities should also be taken into account in all dealings, with children. So I wanted to kind of set that to again explain that between the Convention on the Rights of the Child and the African Children's Charter, it's the same principles. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because it's only in Africa that we have an instrument that is focused on children's rights. No other region of the world has it. And we've actually been criticized. They're like, oh, the Convention on the Rights of the Child is enough. Why does the Africa region decide, that they need their own instruments and all of those things? Now, I will explain a few things. First of all, when the convention was being drafted, the UN Convention, only 2 to 4 African countries were involved in that negotiation. And all of those countries, maybe except for one, were from North Africa, and they were Islamic countries. So from the rest of the countries, there was no input. And one of the ways I always point it out to colleagues and students, if you look at article, I think it's 20 or 25 of the CRC, one of those that deals with children with in need of alternative care, you would find that the provision, it's actually here. The provision talks about the forms of alternative care that you can make available for children who have, for some reason or the other, lost their parents, are orphans, and need another family. So the options are foster care, placement in appropriate institutions, and then it mentions kafala of Islamic law. Now, and adoption. Now, the presence of those Islamic countries from North Africa and others in the world is what made that particular provision to appear in that document. So it's just to tell you the power of participation. If you're there, you can voice out what works for you and make sure it's represented and included. And why did they do that? When that was being negotiated, they looked at it, the adoption, and the argument they raised was that under Islamic law and in the Sharia, they don't recognize adoption the way the rest of the world understands it, where if you adopt me as your daughter, for all intents and purposes, everything, it's automatic, right? It becomes you are my mother, it's the same thing. Under Islamic law, it's not permitted because they have rules of tracing your lineage by blood. They have rules even for inheritance and all of those things. And the rules, well, that's why the rules about how they use their veil, which relative a woman can unveil before and all of those things. So they say if they go ahead with the law, the way it was written, it was going to violate their religion. So in order to accommodate them, they put what works in their context in that law. So that's why till date, it's the only international instrument where you find a uniquely Islamic provision in the law. But why did that happen? They were at the table. So the other African states were not there. So when they started looking at all of this, the CRC at the time, remember, South Africa, for example, was still under apartheid. So they were like, what happens to those children in South Africa? CRC doesn't talk about them. So we need to make provisions for them. What happened to harmful cultural practices that we have here that in other parts of the world they take for granted it doesn't happen? What do we do about those children? We need to talk about that. What happens to education for the girl child, which was in Africa, is like, just send the boys to school, the girls can stay at home, they're going to get married, there's no value in that. What happens to that? We need to take it into account. Then what happens to children of imprisoned mothers and parents? Many women are imprisoned, and then they have their children who have not committed any crime, and then their environment is the prison. Are they prisoners? No. But what do we do about them? So we have to think about that. So there were lots of particular things in the context of many African countries that the Convention on the Rights of the Child did not take into account, and they wanted to reflect that. So those are some of the examples where there was a need to have a specific provision that would focus on the African continent and would address those challenges so that there are no gaps. But the beauty of the human rights system is that it has always been made clear that the Charter is not in competition with the CRC, it's a complementary document. So the idea is no state, for instance, Malawi cannot say, oh no, we have signed the CRC, we don't need to, you need to talk to us about these harmful practices. No. You're in Africa, you've also ratified the African Convention, so you cannot hide behind the other, the CRC. And again, just to tell you part of how it works, I want to use the example of Malawi again, also because Caitlyn mentioned it. In Malawi, the Constitution defined children as anyone below the age of 16. If you listen to Caitlyn's presentation, she was telling you about the CRC says a child is anyone who is 18 and below, unless the law of the country states otherwise. Now, in the African Children's Charter, it says a child is anyone below the age of 18, no exception, no unless, nothing like that. It's straightforward. Now, Malawi It's a state party to the CRC. Malawi has also ratified the African Children's Charter. So the argument of Malawi at the time was, no, but we are party to the CRC. Our constitution told said, no, your constitution is not in compliance because it's violating the African Charter, to which you are also a party. So a complaint was brought against Malawi before the African Committee of Experts on Children's Rights to say something has to happen to be done about this, because then there was a gap for children between 16 and 18. Certain provisions were not being made for them. It was like they are not seen as children. It was like that. They don't belong there. So they were not adults and they were not children. There was nothing for them in terms of the law. So even in terms of policy programming and all of those things, they were just left in a lodge. So that as an example again of why you need these instruments to fill those gaps. So, but thankfully, and this is another novel area that the African system is beginning to bring about, the government of Malawi was very receptive. And what happened is, before the case came to a conclusion, they agreed to have what we call an amicable settlement. So there was a negotiation. They said, okay, take the case out of the court system, the regional court system, the treaty system. I will explain more of that. And then we decide on what will happen. So together with the NGOs that brought the complaint against them, they decided by this date, there's going to be a constitutional amendment to change it, to revise it, to take account of what you have said and all of those things. And there was a follow-up. And you can confirm now, Malawi, that the change has happened. So again, I'm trying to answer why are we having these discussions? We need to know, because if you don't know what the problem is, how are you going to try to even come up with a plan to solve it, right? Now, that brings me back to something I wanted to mention earlier, which I'll mention now, because in 2010, November 2010, I remember I was just beginning to prepare to take up on my own PhD journey then at the time. So I had been invited to, I was going with my supervisor, I had been invited to be involved in a training for the new members of the African Committee of Experts. Now, the way this human rights treaties work, so there is a law, right? And then there is a body that is responsible for making sure that that law is implemented. So at the CRC, the UN level, where you have the Convention on the Rights of the Child, you have the Committee on the Rights of the Child. Now, at the African level, where we have the African Children's Charter, you then have the African Committee of Experts on Children's Rights. So this invitation was to go and train the newly appointed or elected members of that committee on how the system works, what it's about, your role, and how to interpret, the laws. Now, but I left that training. The complaints we had were virtually all these are 11 members. I'll come back to it. 11 members, they appointed. Each country can nominate 2 members, 2 individuals from your country, but eventually you can only have 1 person from one state, because this committee is made up of 11 people, and there are basically two criteria. First of all, you have to be morally, upright in terms of integrity and all of those things. And then the second one, you have to be competent as far as what the subject matter is about, right? So, and there are only 11 of them, and they serve in their personal capacity. So if, for instance, Caitlyn is appointed or put forward, nominated by the government of South Africa, and eventually she gets elected, that's fine, but she's not there representing South Africa. She's there in her personal capacity, right? Yeah. So that's how the system works. So there are only 11, and you have to take into account regional representation, gender, and all of those dynamics for these 11 people. So please, just so I don't forget, the second thing, I'm going to share the website of the committee, because some of the things I'm sharing, you can actually find them there. And that's why I'm giving this history, because when we left in 2010, the problem I had for me was almost all the 11, they were politicians. And we're like, these are not going to help us to advance children's rights. Because what was happening was African governments were just thinking, oh, well, okay, what is this committee? Okay, the African Union. Oh, you helped me during the campaign, during my election. You just go to that committee. It doesn't matter whether the person knows anything. It was just like a reward or compensation for your help during the elections or something. So you had a bunch of people. There was even one, I still remember today, because I stood there in shock for a moment. I looked at my supervisor, I don't know, probably have read about her, Prof. Slow-Nielsen Jr.
Oh, yes.
Good. So I looked at her because I was like, how am I supposed to respond to this question? Because the question was directed at me after I had presented. But the question was, she was saying, I'm reading this you say it's 18, any child with Article 1. I said, yes, ma'am. She went to it, we went together. Definition of a child. For the purposes of this charter, a child means every human being below the age of 18 years. Tell me, when did you people decide? Who are you to be after them? So I stood there and so I looked at her like, how am I supposed to answer this question without being rude? You know, because I was like, you're supposed to be an expert. That was my issue. But if the expert is asking the most basic question that goes to the foundation of why she's there, how do you expect that she's going to do right by the children of Africa? It's not magic. So I left there thinking, okay, this is part of the problem. This is part of why we keep having this discussion. It's not going to change because for them, they just want to go for their meetings. What's my per diem? Put me in first class, please. I don't want to travel in economy. Put me in the best hotel. Where's my per diem? And they're gone. But to actually engage with the work and know what they're doing, they're not able to do it because it's all about patronage. So I left there feeling like this is really going to be a problem. So thankfully, we had a number of other colleagues who also felt the same thing. And we decided, okay, we complain quite a lot in Africa. What can we do? Because at the time, the CRC committee was making a lot of progress. And that's because obviously the UN system works and UNICEF is a major supporter. Anything that the CRC committee wants to do, they get support from UNICEF and particular European governments. At the African level, we don't have the equivalent of UNICEF that does that for us. So we said, okay, we can't always complain about that. What can we do to, in the interim to plug that gap? So we came together, a few of us who were there at that meeting, I still remember November 2010, and we spoke to a couple of colleagues from Plan International, Save the Children, and then we visited the Institute for Human Rights and Democracy in Africa is based in Banjul, the Gambia, and then the African Child Policy Forum in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, because we're also trying to be representational. So we came together, had a meeting about it, and put together a proposal. And the purpose of the proposal was to support the African Committee to actually be the equivalent on the African continent of the CRC Committee and begin to take us forward in advancing children's rights in Africa. At that time, nothing was happening. You would try to go online, you just find one line, Secretariat, you find the address, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and there's nothing, no information, nothing. And then you try to find out, they don't have any support. The African governments, nobody's supporting anything. Again, if it's about the AU assembly, all the meetings where the heads of states gather and take their nice picture in front of the AU, all the money will come in. But now we're talking about children. It's not important. So that's what we're pushing back against. So with that funding, which was specifically for that committee to arise, we got support from CEDA. And that's what we gave back to what they call the African Children's Charter Project. And it was simply to help the committee to get on its feet and begin advancing the rights of children and doing what exactly it exists to do. Because this document has been there since 1989. 1990, it came into force. 1999, but nothing was happening, right? So that was how that journey of getting this African committee to begin moving and having some feet in advancing children's rights started. So, and that has continued till date. And I'm giving that background because, like I said, when I give you the website, it's very gratifying, especially when you know the history, to see where it's come from, to see all the kind of work that is being done now. To date, for example, Caitlyn mentioned something. I remember when you were presenting and you were saying, oh, that's not on the slide. She was mentioning the optional protocols. Optional protocols are simply, now, if there is a law, there is already a law about a particular issue. Then later, you realize that, oh, there was something we forgot or something we should have added, something useful. Then they develop an optional protocol, which is additional to that instrument. But from the language, you can already hear it's what? Optional. So if a state has already, let's say South Africa has already ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and they feel we don't want to address these issues that have to do with sale of children, trafficking, and all of those things. It's optional. We don't want to sign it. And nobody can hold them, nobody can force them to do that. So it's not binding on them, even though they are party to the mother instrument. Now, at the African level, the foresight that some of the founding leaders had at the time was when they were drafting this document, in the same charter, they included the capacity for African governments to be brought to account for any areas where they're either violating a right or they are not doing what they said they would. So when you sign up to the African Charter, you sign up to that from the very beginning. So that means I, as an individual, I can take a case against the government of South Africa, say children in Khayelitsha, something is happening and nothing is being done. So from the very beginning, that was written into the law. So what is now an optional protocol at the UN level, which is still recent, has always been there at the African system, but it just needed to be given teeth. And I'm saying that because to date now, I tried to make a list. There's close to about 25 different cases that have been brought against these different states, and we have seen action. And I'll just mention a few of them. For instance, in 2019, there was a case against Tanzania, and it had to do with pregnant girls. So there was the former president, they had this funny, weird idea of this policy where they go and do testing of children, forced pregnancy testing, and then the girls are expelled from school. It doesn't matter whether the impregnation is by a fellow student, it doesn't matter whether it's by a teacher who abused the child, nothing happens to the perpetrator or whoever did anything. You're a girl, we have tested, you're pregnant, out. That was just it. So they were being expelled. So we said, so does pregnancy mean you no longer have your right to be a child, or you no longer have your right to education or anything, right? So that was the case that was brought against the government of Tanzania before the committee, you relying on that provision in the law, and it was successful. In Sudan, it was in the context of children and armed conflicts. Sudan, South Sudan, all the conflicts that have been going on. So at that time, also in 2018, conflicts going on in the Blue Nile region area and the South Kordofan area. There was some groups were specifically attacking civilians and children. And under international law, normally you shouldn't attack civilians. I mean, that's part of why this whole Palestinian-Israel thing is causing all the ruckus it is causing all over the world. But it was a systematic, targeted approach. So that was the case that was brought against the government of Sudan. Hundreds of thousands, because 120,000 or so by the time the case was brought, children had already been killed in that conflict. So that's what it was about. And this, I'm mentioning this because these ones are cases that they have finalized. They found them guilty and I use guilty, strictly they don't use that in the treaty body system. But so they found guilty and the cases were finalized, and specific steps for each state to take were given with timelines for follow-up and what we will do to make sure that you are implementing it, right? Now, another example, in Mauritius, again, this one were similar to the case we're talking about. Because of some cultural practice, some children are simply born into slavery. When you're born, because of where you come from, your culture, your tribe, whatever, you are the slave of some master. In this day and age, so that was what the case was about. That what do you mean that in 2015, children are born and they're slaves and automatically they can go to school, they can do anything because they exist at whatever their master decides about them. Again, that case was brought, finalized in favor of the NGOs who brought it. Cameroon, it was the case of a 10-year-old girl who was raped, but she was raped by a certain influential man in society. And for some reason, the police were just shielding him and refusing to investigate and prosecute this man. So, because you are allowed to go to these treaty systems when you can show that at your national level, you have tried. The courts, the system, there's no opportunity for you to get justice. Then you go to the regional system. So that's why I'm giving these particular examples, because they proved that they tried in the courts in Cameroon, for example, nothing happened to the highest level they could get to. Then they could then go to the regional body. So the committee could then accept the case, look at the merits, and then come up with a decision and recommendations on what the government of Cameroon should do for those, to address those violations. There was that one. Another case in Sudan, which was very interesting. This was 2015, because this had to do with when the conflict between South Sudan and when South Sudan became an independent state. You suddenly had a number of children who became stateless because Sudan changed their nationality laws and automatically revoked the citizenship of so many children who, for instance, had maybe a South Sudanese mother or a Sudanese father. So thousands and thousands of children suddenly found themselves stateless. They didn't belong to Sudan, they didn't belong to South Sudan. So the right to nationality, all of those things, automatically they were made refugees, and all of those things were what that case was about. Again, brought to the committee, settled, finalized in favor of Malawi, I already mentioned that the age of the child, that was one case. Malawi has a second case pending against it right now that has not been addressed, but that one was finalized in 2014. In Senegal, what was the issue? You have these children who they call them the Taliban children. They are supposed to be sent to these Quranic schools to get religious education. But these so-called teachers, what they do, they make these children into beggars. They send them out on the streets, and you must come back with money. That's where your feeding is going to come from and all of those things. So like, what is happening here? So that was what the case against Senegal was about, to get that matter addressed. Again, successfully finalized. The case was brought in 2012. Kenya, I'm sure my Kenyan colleagues can tell me. Yes. In fact, you should tell us about it. The children of Nubian descent. Do you remember?
Which year was that, if you don't mind?
It was brought in, I think it was brought in 2010 or 9, but the judgment only came in recently in 2010, 14 or thereabouts.
Because what I am aware of, yes. Maybe that time I was still not.
No, it's fine.
I was younger then. So in Kenya, what I know is seriously happening when it comes to children of Nubian descent is they're put on the streets. Beg. And if they don't I think you mentioned, is it Malawi that you mentioned? Senegal. If they don't come back with money, they're punished for that. And now there was an expose last year. It's not only Nubians, we are also getting Tanzanian kids into Kenya. So the streets are full of Tanzanian children. You might not know until maybe if you speak to them, you'll get their pure perfect Swahili accent, then you know this one is not really from the coast. So the problem with children on the streets right now is begging, forced begging.
Yeah. So we started the case with the Nubian children because that was particularly egregious because it was historical in the context of these were children who in the colonial era, before Kenyan independence, all either those who were brought for different development purposes or military purposes from, say, Kenya, the neighboring countries in Kenya, Ethiopia, Eritrea, or all of those who are there. So for all intents and purposes, all they've known is Kenya. It's for generations. But systematically, they were not recognized as Kenyans. They knew nowhere else to go. So they had no access to IDs, which meant no access to healthcare, no access to education, nothing. And Kenya, she can tell you, Kenya is very big on IDs in the system. So they were very marginalized and discriminated against because in Kenya, there are so many things you cannot do. So it was like a systematic way of excluding these children and those from that communities. Obviously, because this is a committee on children, we're focusing on the children. There was another case at the African Union level, targeting all the older people who were concerned. But you can imagine from before Kenyan independence till date, you're saying you don't recognize them, but they contribute to Kenyan. Everything about them is Kenyan. I mean, just like you said, you hear them, you wouldn't know until you're told. So that was the case that we had to take again to the committee. And again, it was in favor. And in Uganda, it was on behalf of the children in northern Uganda. This was in the context of the Joseph Kony case and the, what is it called, the SPLM and all of those liberation fighters in Sudan, in Uganda, and the impact it was having on children. So those are some of the cases that have had real impact on the ground. Also because you don't leave it at the point of we got a decision. Now, what are you going to do next? Now, that leads me to wanting to explain part of how the committee works. There is obviously always the broad mandate to promote and protect children's rights. How do you do it? One of the ways is through these communications that I was just explaining. What is a communication? A communication is simply a complaint that the government has either violated the rights of some children or is not doing something about it, that you bring against that particular government to the committee. If the committee decides that it is admissible, they have criteria for that. For instance, you can't just give us, you got information, you read a newspaper article that said, this is happening in Kenya, children are begging, and you just say, that's not enough. You must give us proper, well-researched information so that we have something to work with. When they decide, then they decide also to look at the case. The government is brought before the committee together with the complainants, and then you present the case in a proper way, and then a decision is given. and then you tell us what you're going to do going forward. Because we are being very deliberate about, we don't want laws. We always know everybody, we're always talking about the fact that we have wonderful laws, wonderful laws, wonderful laws. But the point is, what are we doing about the laws, right? Where's the implementation? If there's no implementation, we might as well not have the laws. So they do that. They look at all of those different bodies. We set up in place a committee. So to do that, at the committee level, they have what they call working groups. And these come under what they call special mechanisms. Like, beyond what the law says, they are trying to look for what are the ways in which we can make sure that we keep advancing these rights and seeing action in the shortest possible time. So for instance, you have what they call thematic rapporteurs. So of the 11, you would find one person is responsible for, say, health, development, and welfare. Another person for education. They all have different areas. You will find all of them when I give you the link, you go to the website. They all have their different areas. So whenever anything in any African country, in any area that affects children's rights, all you need to check is who is the rapporteur, the thematic rapporteur or lead for health, say for instance, or education. There's a crisis in South Africa about this. You immediately write to contact that person. He or she then has the responsibility to issue a statement and then tell us what are the next steps that we're going to take. Because another thing that the committee is able to do is they can actually go on what they call investigative missions. If you load the complaints, they can go to those places and actually see for themselves what is happening. Some of these cases, before they make decisions on them, they actually embarked on investigative missions to confirm some of the reports. So they'll go themselves. All of these things cost money. Those are all the things that we had to, it's not enough to talk and complain. So they have to go visit those places and get information to help them in coming to a decision. So they have those thematic rapporteurs. They also have the country ones. So again, I'm using the example of Caitlyn because I'm hoping you'll go to the committee someday. So because she'll be responsible for a number of countries. So each member has about 4 to 5 to 7 countries maximum, because I mean, there are 54 countries and there are only 11 of them that each one is responsible for. Obviously, you will not be responsible for your own country. If you are from South Africa, you wouldn't be responsible for South Africa, just to avoid putting you in a tight corner with your government or conflict of interest. So again, where they have specific issues in those countries, we know who to contact. And then the person is able to take the lead and give us direct guidance on how to go about it. Then the very crucial one is what they call the working groups. Why I say crucial is because the working groups is not only fixed on the committee members. Say somebody here, you are an expert in some area. For instance, I recommend Caitlyn. She works on this area or whatever it is. She should be an independent expert that the committee is able to rely on and consult for issues, say, to do with sexual exploitation and what have you. So the current working groups, you have one on children with disabilities. You have one on climate change and children's rights. You have one on business, the impact of business on children's rights. That's another big issue that is coming up these days. Advertising that is targeting children, these algorithms that nobody is just even thinking about to just target children, digital space and all of those things. And the most important working group, in my opinion, is the working group on the implementation of decisions. So when a decision has been taken, it's not enough to just, finish and plan, we all go. Okay, so what has been done since that decision was taken to ensure that we actually see change? We don't want to come back to this same subject matter. Now, speaking of that, another thing that the committee does, one of the ways is what they call state reporting, but that's their number one way of implementing the mandate. From the moment a state party has ratified the instrument, you're under obligation within the next 2 years to present to us a report on what you have done on the situation of children from the time when you ratified till now when you're reporting, and subsequently every 3 years. Now, that is a duty they also have under the UN system. But what is recommended is you don't have to give us a new report, because government started complaining that it's too much, we have to report to the committee, UN, we have to also report here. Give us the same report, but when you're coming to the African Committee, you need to make sure that you have included those elements that were missing in the CRC, that were the reason for which we had an African Charter in the first place, so that there are no gaps. We see what you are doing there. And I mentioned that because I was involved specifically in the development of the reports, 2 reports that South Africa has presented before the African Committee and at the CRC Committee. I was involved with the NGOs in preparing the one for the South Africa delegation. So we brought different organizations that work on children's rights. And we also approach the departments, give us the people who handle children's rights in your unit, if they are interested, so that we can have one common report and present to the committee. Now, why is this important? When the government presents its own report, it is important that those of us from civil society also present our reports. Those ones are called shadow reports or alternative reports or complementary reports. And why are they important? Unfortunately, I mean, just like every human being, that's how our hearts are. The government will put their best foot forward. If you see many of the government reports, oh, everything in South Africa is perfect. Everything is wonderful. The children, oh, they are all in school. Feeding, oh, we have nutrition programs that is sorting all of them out. Where is the complaint? So you need the reports from the NGOs to say, these are the actual things that are happening. These are the gaps, and this is how we need you to engage with the government when they come before you. So that's why we do those things. And I remember one specific example where it was very interesting because the government of South Africa, in order to prove that everything was fine, in the context of education, for instance, they even brought a child in the delegation. But this child came from one of the best schools in the whole nation and was telling us how everything is wonderful. Thank goodness we also had the foresight when we were preparing. We struggled to raise funds to also get a few children to go with our CSO delegation. So when it was her turn, the girl said, I don't know what she's talking about. She's on that side. I live just in Tembisa. Our schools are nothing like what she's saying. And then we could discover, and that's when the committee could understand. So, okay, what do you mean by the categories of school? Okay, what kind of support do these ones get? What kind of support do these ones get? Then they actually get true information to get the full picture of what is happening. Then they're able to know how to deal or engage with the government going forward. And then the governments are not able to hide and just tell us, 1,000,001 stories. In the context of, I want to give 2 other country examples before I start to wrap up. I remember, for instance, in the context of Nigeria, it was very interesting because I still remember the words that were used. The African Union was very impressed. The government of Nigeria sent a very high-level power delegation, blah, 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 because they sent minister for these all top figures and they all came. I don't know, in my opinion, I said this is just an intimidation strategy or something, and then they came and presenting all of their stuff. But now, because you had CSOs who work in Nigeria, they won't know what is going on the ground. They've engaged with the committee through shadow reports. They're able to give them, don't listen to all of these things. They say, ask about this, ask about that. So for instance, one of the questions was, so to what extent have these new laws you've been telling us about applied to all the regions of the country and the 36? Do you know it was at that point that not just the African Union, but even all over the world, people understood that even though they were lauding this wonderful law they had made, that law was only applicable, say, maybe half of the country. Because they had a system where they say each component unit, so like for instance, if it was in South Africa, each province then has to go through its own process to accept the law. Exactly. So it meant that in all of the half of the country where that had not happened, there was nothing happening for children there. So the committee could tackle them right on that issue. As the central government, what are you doing about that? You have the responsibility, according to what Article 1 says. You have to take legislative and other measures to ensure that every single right is affected. So you can't come and tell us, no, we are a federal system, but you are the federal government. So what are you doing about it? So then you're able to put their feet to the fire and actually get action from them and firm commitments that you can follow up on going after that. The last example was, again, back to Kenya. Kenya was very interesting because Kenya is always a very interesting example because what was interesting about Kenya was you had like multiple NGOs wanting to present their own shadow reports. So I was very proud then to be from the South African side because then we were used as a best practice example that no, please, from today, this was in 2014, it became a law. All other CSOs in all other nations must follow the South African approach. Because what we did, we gathered like this. It was a big group, about 2 or 3 times before each session, whether at the community in Addis Ababa then or in Geneva at the UN. So that we didn't want any stone left unturned. The experts on health, whatever it is, and we also had all manner of representation, race, rural, all of them were there, so that we had one full comprehensive report. And then when we finished, for all those who couldn't be part of the process, we sent it out so that people could go through and endorse the report, that it was a true reflection of the situation as far as each person knew in their own context. Now, the beauty of that was the committee was able to have one document that was speaking one language And I'm saying that because that's one of the accusations we get at the CSO level. Silos, people are doing their own thing. So in Kenya, you had this one wanted to present their own, this one wanted to present. Committee said, no. Can you all go have your own caucus, have a session, meet together and combine and then give us one solid report? Because when we do that, we save time, we save resources, and we are actually able to be more targeted and to get the kind of results we want instead of wasting time inviting and this one wants to be prominent. Because again, I always tell colleagues, why are we here? If it's the children, if it's about your ego, out. If it's about the children, in. We don't have time for, like I always say, we don't have the luxury of time. Let's get the action we want and put away all of those other, sentiments and things that stand along our way. So those are the kind of things that have been happening at the committee level. There are challenges. That's why I'm saying you lay the groundwork well. There are still lots of challenges. But the beauty we have now is there are lots who are aware and we are like, eyes out, what's happening? So there's a strong network. The moment there's something here, we get the information. The moment there's something here, we get the information, all to make sure that we are able to be on top of things, liaise with the committee members who are involved. So there is something called the CSO Forum of the African Committee. So before every session of the committee, we're there, having gathered all of this information to add to the discussions that will be had. So there's a standing session that is always given to us to share information on what is happening around the continent and to get buy-in of the committee in how to engage the governments going further. So the last thing I'm going to say, currently the current members of the committee, any other thing we can talk about in questions, plenary, later I can even, my email can be shared. Current members of the committee, the 11, there's somebody from Uganda, Nigeria, Burkina Faso, Mauritius, Algeria, Cameroon, Congo, Brazzaville, Botswana, Angola, Zimbabwe, and Mauritania. Immediate members who left, I think in the last election, were from Ethiopia, Tanzania, Zambia, Botswana, and Ivory Coast. And before them, there was one from South Africa. So those are the current members of the committee. And what is wonderful about it now is back to the story I told you from the beginning. We started lobbying so that every time it's another time for elections to get us new committee members. If we know that this person is not competent, you don't know about the subject matter, we are going to lobby against you. It's not personal, but we don't have time for this. We want action. We want to see change. If you don't know about children's rights, you're interested in it, it's fine. Go and do a master's, go and study, whatever it is, and then you can retire. But right now, we're interested in people like this, who know what they're talking about, because we want to move, right? So that's in a summary, some of the things I've come to share with you.
So you'll share with us some website addresses
Yes.
The information.
Oh.
Thank you. Okay, we have about 30 minutes left for questions and for discussion. I've encouraged the Zoom audience to write questions into the chat box or the Q&A, and we will then make sure that they are answered. Can I perhaps just start with a question to both of you, but you may have the same answer, I'm not sure. In a situation where on our continent, so many people, because of poverty and underdevelopment and so on, the child playing some sort of part in the economy of the family and maybe the extended family is vital. If that child doesn't go and fetch water while the parents are at work or something, there's no water. Yep. If that child is not looking after the goats in a particular place, the goats are lost, and that's a disaster for the family itself. At that level of almost survival, when we come with treaties and charters and laws, isn't there a terrible disconnection? For people living in that situation, how do we expect them to adhere to these stipulations? And kind of conversely, do we risk making the laws look stupid in their eyes so that they will just automatically ignore them? How do we deal with that kind of disconnect?
But in Malawi, actually, we did now a child is anybody below 18 and from Malawi.
Yes.
There have been so many people, men imprisoned because an affair with a girl child below 18. And I witnessed one court case where the father was sent to prison 14 years. And the girl mother cried at court, who's now going to take care of me? Who's going to support who's going to support the kid? For 14 years, she'll have to struggle in soul. In moral theology, there is a principle which says the means does not justify the end. Neither does the end justify the means. Now here we're looking at what end that would be positive enough for both, or even for three parties, no? The kid, the mother, and this father who is sent to prison. It's maybe seen as in that sense, does this law make sense to the people out there? There is a chief who was really gone strong, with strong force to reclaim girl child that way, or girl children that way, you know, in marriages. And back, at one moment, they brought all the kids to the chief's home to take care of the kids, because we can't take care of them. I just want to compare with what you're saying. I even brought it there to myself. Does that make the people really appreciate the law and say it, or does the law really make sense in this case? Just want to supplement what Mike is saying.
So from my side, I think that I would come at it from like a very like theoretical perspective, because that's more what I'm used to. And I think the importance there is looking at what you mentioned, the evolving capacities of the child, and looking at those types of provisions which are targeted towards the individual life circumstances of a particular child. And it kind of molds the rest of the provisions in accordance with the life circumstance of that particular child. So I think that when you do get provisions like that actually help you make sense of the rest of the provisions, you can actually bridge that disconnect between practice and the law.
Yeah. No. Okay. Just to add to it, a bit of the theoretical and more of the practical elements of it. The first thing you must always have at the back of your mind, and that's one of the things that we are trying to get to push governments on. When you sign a law, it's not to look good. Historically, what African governments do is when they sign up to a law, it's so that they can go to the donor community and say, we are complying with human rights, we love human rights, give us money. It's not because they love human rights or they love the people, right? So what we're trying to do is to say, we're not interested in you loving your people. It's fine, we know that doesn't come naturally, but we're saying, do your job. Now, what that means is, when the government has signed up to a document or a law, you are responsible. That's what they call state obligation. For every teeny nitty-gritty of it, there are different models operandi, the house and all of those things. But ultimately, the state is responsible. And that's why even for children, the state is called the ultimate guardian of all children, right? So they have the primary responsibility. And one of the ways to handle that responsibility, two things. First, there is a linkage between every right. You don't take one right in isolation if it doesn't make sense with the framework and the rest of it. That's one element of it, which I'll come back to. The second side of it is this. The first responsibility you have after you have made a law, and that's why I said we were ask them these questions. Do the people of Malawi know about this law? Because one of the responsibilities that they have in the law is they must disseminate in all the languages that the people can understand. And you even put it in formats that even children who we are advocating for understand. So for example, governments are not yet doing it, but we're already pushing. With support from Save the Children, we already have what they call child-friendly versions of the African Charter. So that even children in schools, they started a project where children are seeing it, these are your rights. So it's put in simple language. I am a child, I am entitled to education, all of those things. So those are some of the things that are being done, so that children who are the beneficiaries of these rights actually know what it's about. And then parents, so that it doesn't matter what your level of education, you understand what these laws are. Because again, in the African context, you can bear me witness, a lot of the violations we have, a lot of them are tied to ignorance. whether it's cultural practices and different things that happen, many people don't even know. But if the government does not step up to its responsibility of disseminating the information down to all the languages in the simplest forms possible for every single person, then they have not yet fulfilled their mandate. And that's part of what we are pushing. So I'm saying that to say it's part of the responsibilities that they have, and it's what part of what we hold them to account for. To what extent have these laws been disseminated across the country and in a language and a manner that every single person is able to understand? Many of them are failing there, but we are not relenting, we are pushing. So that's the one thing, because that's part of how the disconnect. We're not now saying you must send everybody to school, you must go and let, unfortunately, that's people are where they are, but the laws are applicable to all of them. And in law, we always say ignorance is not an excuse, right? If you've been found, you've done it, it doesn't matter that you don't know, you didn't know, you still have to, to pay for it. Now, I'm saying that to talk about the linkages of laws. Remember when I was giving a Namibian example where I said children themselves were clear on the fact that, because sometimes we think children don't know, oh no, children are very clever, they're intelligent, they are, fully formed beings. Now, they themselves were saying, no, when you do something wrong, there should be a consequence. We can talk about the consequence, but you cannot say there should be no consequence. Otherwise, then we shouldn't have law, we shouldn't have society, there's no order. It should be back to the Hobbesian era where survival of the fittest, do as you like, and all of those things. Now, I'm saying that to say, when a father has committed such a crime, obviously the first thing, we're not going to say, oh, simply because he's the breadwinner, nothing should happen. Then any other father who feels, okay, he got away with it, so what's the problem? Because then we'll be sending another wrong message all across the country. But now, that's where I talk about the linkage of laws. What are the social protection systems in Malawi? Because you're supposed to take account of those things. Remember I mentioned children of imprisoned mothers. When you take this breadwinner, this person to prison, what are the arrangements in place for the continued support of the mother? For instance, let's say she's an unemployed person or whatever, housewife who was fully dependent on them. And how about the child? So in the system, as you are thinking about justice for this man, you're also thinking about protection for those who are left behind. So it's like having your two hands. You have to have the balance on one side. So if the government has not done the other side, they have not completed the cycle on implementation. So I'm telling you that this is how the law is understood. It's supposed to be holistic. The problem we are having is it's not yet there, but that's what we are pushing, that all of this, they are tied together. I can give you another example from Ghana. It was a single mother who the issue was, she was accused of stealing a phone. And then we're like, we don't have a problem. Everybody agrees it's wrong. She shouldn't have stolen the phone. But then you throw her in prison, and then what happens to the 5 children? How does that solve the problem? Surely there are other means we can punish her without sending her to prison and depriving the children, of being taken care of by the mother. So all the laws are interrelated. And the full circle must be complete when any government, ultimately, which is responsible, is applying them. The last thing I'm going to say in response to that, again, back to the issue of the role of children and not even necessarily just poverty. One thing I failed to mention when I was speaking earlier on was, in the African Charter, another thing that is very unique that we don't have anywhere in the UN system, there is a provision on the responsibilities of the child, Article 31. And it was deliberately put in there when this document was being drafted. And it was because the discussion, the understanding was, in the African context, we have not always just talked about rights, where it's just about you take what everybody owes you. What about what you owe society? Society exists because we're able to give and take. You contribute your own quota to the society. And again, back to what I said, you don't suddenly become 18 and you're mature automatically or magically. No, you start learning from childhood, right? Contributing at home, again, tied to evolving capacities. The chores you would ask a 7-year-old to do are not the same you would expect a 16-year-old to do, right? So, but age-appropriate chores and contributions that can be made by the child right from the home, going into society at school levels, church, whatever it is, you start to learn it from the home. And I remember, again, it was the government of Zimbabwe when they were presenting, they were like, they don't understand this Article 31, that the next thing you would accuse us that we are not complying. Tell us exactly what to do. What does it mean? So again, back to its mandate, the committee developed a general comment, and I mentioned it because I was one of those who assisted with drafting that document for the committee on the responsibilities of the child, so that every government is able to understand and know what they're communicating to their nationals about the responsibilities of the child. Why is that important? For instance, if we don't make it clear, somebody can say, FGM is in our culture. It is the responsibility of this child to submit herself to FGM. In our culture, when you are 12, you are mature in order to contribute to the family, we must marry you off so that. So we had to make it clear, anything that is a violation of a law that is already provided is not a responsibility of the child. When we talk about responsibilities of the child, we are talking about age-appropriate things that helps the child to develop and to learn. I'm sure when you were little, your mom would do this. That, because suddenly you're going to be on your own. I have a friend of mine, for instance, just this morning, last night we had two conversations, last night and then this morning. She has a 12-year-old and they are thinking next year to send her to a boarding school. And then she had been worried, I'm not sure she's ready, that she can do things on her own and all of those things because of the way she's been brought up. I said, just keep giving her little things to do and just don't step into help, just watch and see to what extent she can do it. Allow the mistakes to happen. That's how part of how we learn and we grow. So in the call, she was trying to report that she's shocked because her helper who used to be there has not been around for the past 2 weeks because her older brother is sick. And she is amazed at what her own 12-year-old is able to do. She says she's been cooking, been cleaning, doing a lot of those things. I said, I tell you, people look at, they're not fragile. You just have to trust them and know that they are able. Otherwise, if your child is not able, isn't that a reflection on you that you have failed? You see, because we also have to think back to what you were saying, we have to reflect also on ourselves. What are we trying to produce? So we also want to produce well-grounded, groomed people who can contribute positively to society. So it works both ways. There are rights, what you expect from society, but you also have your own duties. What do you contribute, even in terms of how you relate to others? It's part of what you contribute, to a cordial and civil society.
Okay, thank you. I just want to check, we have a guest who's raised a hand, okay. And I'm just going to allow him to talk in case he wants to talk. Father Wenceslas, do you want to say something? You can talk if you want to. Jennifer, you can go ahead. You are muted. You have to unmute yourself, Jennifer. In the meantime, are there any other Michael?
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, I have to say that, okay, I'm impressed and at the same time I'm confused. Yeah, actually for the last few years I've been working with pro-life, and of course pro-life is more like speaking about the unborn babies. Of course, when we say teenage pregnancy, the focus is more on the unborn babies. So, and I didn't know that there is such a convention actually for the children's right. My confusion is, okay, we mentioned something like, okay, if a girl maybe is pregnant, then maybe in some governments or some countries, the girl is asked to leave the school. And then after that, nothing happens to the perpetrator. So what does it say perhaps about, okay, if she's out of school, and of course, now it's going to be the responsibility of the parents to take care of her and of course the unborn baby. So because in pro-life you find that, okay, in the mind of Margaret Sanger, so there is a book written, No Gods, No Masters. That means if you remove God from everything, that means you can do whatever you want to do. So sometimes this is a challenge in our advocacy as okay, from the church side. So how to convince the parents or even, yeah, the society when it comes to such problems? These are the challenges. Okay, sometimes you find that, okay, it's like you are fighting the parents, you are fighting the family. So sometimes it becomes a challenge to us. So that's why I'm saying, maybe where do we put that one? We say the evolution. We say Charles Darwin, what did he say? Natural selection, survival of the fittest. So I think this is still continuing in our society. So I'm glad to hear that, okay, there is such a convention. So at least this was like an eye opener for me. So it was not actually, I did not expect it, but I think my eyes are now opened. Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation.
Okay. We just had a comment of thanks from one of the people in the Zoom audience. No questions as such yet, but they may still come in. Any further? Yes, Gabriel.
Thank you very much, Professor. Link. I come from northern Kenya, where the pastoralists live, and traditional life is very much practiced. I was very keen to hear, apart from the rights of children, we also have their responsibilities. We have been challenged in our work regarding the contribution of children to the livelihoods of the families. For example, a family sends all children to school. Who's going to take care of the livestock? We have goats, camels, and cows, which is the main source of livelihoods of the family. So a case is given where the father or the mother says, out of the 7 children that I have, I've taken 5 to school so that 2 can take care of these livestock to support these ones. But the constitution in Kenya is that education is free and compulsory. So the chiefs are forced to ensure that children are taken to school. Of course, this is not 100% done, but it has been a major challenge because the parents are also aging. You have this livestock, and they belong to these children. And in any case, children have gone to school, and we don't see anyone who is successful. So there is all this confusion. So I wanted you to address maybe the responsibility of children are taking into account the example that I gave. Thank you.
Thank you.
So excuse me.
No problem.
Yeah, because I forgot, so actually I had a question.
Sure.
I was now, we are looking at the end results.
Yes.
So this girl is out of school.
Yes.
Now there are 2 options. It's either adoption or abortion.
Mhm.
Now, what does it say about the right of the unborn baby? Because then if the girl wants to come back to school,
Yes.
it's either to give that child for adoption or to abort in order to, what does it say about the
All right.
right of unborn children?
I'll start from you and then I come back to the other one. Okay. First of all, before any law is finalized and adopted and then put up for ratification, like I was saying at the beginning, there's a lot of negotiations that go on. And it is because of different controversies and debates and viewpoints, that's one of the things that really delays the process because everybody has strong feelings. I want to mention that in order to avoid that debate and that drama, because it came up when the CRC was being negotiated. How about the unborn child? People wanted to put the rights. Now, to a compromise position was the law is applicable for every child from birth. Because at the time, given how the debates were going, you would not have this story that Caitlyn was giving you where everybody has signed up to the documents because the debate would never have ended. The whole pro-life arguments. And so it was like, okay, let us deal with rights, those who are right here from the moment of birth and then to whenever. So that's the category of children. So that's how that was dealt with. So I need to give you that background so that you know, because even to date, it always comes up in class, you always have students. What about the right? That's why, because it will tell you, it's called the Convention on the Rights of the Child. It's not saying that, it's not arguing for or against, but it's just saying to avoid getting into that hole where then we'll not be able to do anything. Let's focus on the law from those who are here from the moment of birth and onwards to 18. So that's generally that position, how it is dealt with in the law. Now, in relation to pregnant girls or children, the position is never, oh, go and adopt. Nobody, there's even no viewpoint on that. But again, that's where government obligation kicks in, because what we say is, for obvious reasons, the child is still able to go to school. Maybe at a certain stage, by the time you're getting to the time for delivery, the child cannot cope anymore. So obviously, the child will have to leave school at some point, but it shouldn't be because the child is expelled because she got pregnant, right? Because that is not solving anything. we all know pregnancy rates is still happening all over and all of those. And part of the problem is this thing of you make it a girl child issue, you victimize the girl, but we don't look at the root causes. How is it happening? Who is sleeping with these girls? Yeah. They don't get pregnant by themselves. We only had one Virgin Mary and it's done, right? But nobody wants to look at that and do anything about it. So we're not solving the problem. So it is for the purpose of birth, obviously the child will leave school. So if, for instance, it's exam period, she's going to miss the exams, but there must be plans in place. After the 3 months, 6 months, however much time the child needs to go back to school. Because again, the laws are supposed to say education is compulsory and pregnancy does not terminate your right to education. Even if you commit a crime, you don't lose your right to be a child simply because you committed a crime. We just say we treat you differently from the way we treat an adult. You are still a child. You're still learning, you're still growing, you're still developing. So in the interim, that discussion now, that's where state responsibility kicks in and parental rights and responsibilities. What do the parents want? They're going to care for that new baby while the other child finishes her education. Do they want to give the child away? That's a discussion between them. And that's why I keep on saying that part of what we are doing with states is you can't just say, oh, we signed and you fold your hand. What are you doing to make sure that now the laws are translated down to the villages? Because that's when it's complete. So the whole cycle, so if, for instance, a single girl is pregnant, from the point of finding out that she's pregnant to the point of what happens to the baby after she has the baby and what happens to her when she goes back to school, there must be a full circle touching on all the different people who are affected. Because remember, the new baby is also a child now, who we have to protect. So that's why I keep on talking about the full circle. That means you can't touch on one point and leave the rest. Everything must be touched on. That's the current position of the law. Now, tied to that, I had started talking about the responsibilities of the child. I'll just read the beginning part. It says, every child shall have responsibilities towards his family and society, the state and other legally recognized communities and the international community. Now, this is where it's important. The child, subject to his age and ability, and such limitations as may be contained in the present charter, shall have the duty to then expect to work for the cohesion of the family, to respect parents, and all of those things. It's listed out here. So the general comment I talked about, when I give you the site, you see it, we were explaining what does it exactly mean when you're working for the cohesion of the family? What does it mean when you're contributing to society? We are not saying child marriage. We are not saying any child labor or exploitation or pornography. That's not, because some people come and tell you, oh, that is working. No, no. Remember, we always make a distinction between child labor and child work. When it is child labor, it is interfering with the child's education, dignity, health, and it is standing in the way of the child enjoying his or her rights, but not child work. Child work is part of the responsibilities, part of what you're doing to learn how to be a responsible and functional member in society. Even just to take care of yourself, you must learn to do things, right? That's child work. So that's how child responsibilities of the child is understood. And I want to mention to you that initially we used to have, again, back to what I said earlier, we used to have criticisms. Why do you have an African charter? You Africans are always, or why do you have responsibilities of the child? It's a way to take back the rights. I said, no, it's very deliberate. I don't know how many of you recall in the 2010s, I can't remember the specific year, there was this riot, young people, youth, children in London, blah, blah. It was really a thing. And then I remember subsequently, one of the meetings later, then the Europeans were telling us that they think they made a mistake, that the fact that we have responsibilities, that these children are not behaving this way because they think we just owe them. Everybody just owes them. They don't have anything to contribute. So they were lauding the value of also reminding young people that you also have responsibilities to yourself, to your family, and to the larger society at varying levels in line with your evolving capacities with time. So that's how those girls are dealt with and the matter of responsibilities of the child. Now, again, to the responsibilities of the child, remember, it's not the job of the law or any government to say, oh, this type of family is a good family, this is a bad family, or this culture is a good culture. No, that's not, nobody has any control over that. So the pastoralists are the pastoralists. That is who they are. What the law requires is the state party to say, these are the kind of people we have. One of the categories, and it's not only Northern Kenya, Northern Nigeria, Senegal, Mali, there are so many places. East Africa, North Africa, West Africa, where you have those issues. But the thing is, part of the obligation of the states that we are pushing them is, how do you make the laws apply even in that context? So for instance, in some pastoralist communities in Senegal and Nigeria, what we have been pushing is what we call mobile schools that follow them as they go from place to place. So we are not stopping them from looking after the cows, but make sure that their education is going with them. So it's about the government now putting their money where their mouth is. What are the resources? What are the plans to ensure that kind of system for them? And again, you talked about when it comes to cows, farming, and some of those things, a lot is dependent on time, weather conditions. So that's why some parents are arguing. They're like, what do you mean? In that morning is when we need to milk the cow. In the morning, that's when we need, you're saying that's when we should send the children to school and all of those things. So we're saying, because some of the laws we took in Africa, we were not thinking about our context. We're just copying because we wanted to look good as human rights champions just to collect money, right? That's when we started, because then that's when they abolished. We used to have evening schools, afternoon, different timing to take into account different categories of children. And many countries, in the bid to go and prove themselves as human rights, they abolished that. But now we are finding that that's what we need to deal with, for instance, pastoralists. So there are some children who, the morning is when they have to do that chore because of the nature of it. But is there a school system for them in the afternoon or in the evening? So that if they cannot go to a regular school in the morning, they have their school at another time that takes into account their context and their responsibilities. We don't have the power to change their context. We are not even called to do that. We are not supposed to do that. The beauty of society is our diversity, but the law must take into account all of those diversities and try to adapt to make sure that the needs and the rights of those same people are also met in their different contexts. So that is what is being done in some countries, and I'm hoping that we'll get it to Kenya, but it's on cards.
It also ties to the right, like it also ties to the idea that children's rights, they're not like stagnant, they're not set in stone, they mold themselves per each per each child's situation, and like the way that they come into practice is that, as I mentioned in my presentation, they don't exist just solely within like the paper of the law, like they exist in communities and within that greater circle.
Yeah.
So they get their meaning from every interaction.
Thank you. Thank you. Just a couple of points that have come through on the chat box. I don't want to lose sight of them, but I'm also conscious that we're just a minute or two away from closing. There's a question around the powers of treaty bodies to hold governments accountable, in particular for what the questioner says are broader policies and their applications. Interventions in cases of specific violations are useful, but what about broader systemic violations? And I think some of the cases that you've mentioned, it's so easy to identify. Here as an individual child, perhaps, who is being exploited in a particular way, you can construct a case around that. But when it's more of a social phenomenon in a country, how then do the treaty bodies exert accountability? That's one question. And then there are many compliments to both of you and your presentations, and thanks from many people. The other interesting point here is around, maybe we've discussed it a bit, from Uganda, noting the big problem in implementation of the law, that children as well as parents are not aware of child rights, both in regional and national law, and the laws are not translated into local languages, which is clearly going to be a problem in many jurisdictions in Africa. So maybe the two of you could just address those two questions finally, and then we'll wrap it up.
I think you're the best to deal with the treaty.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, the last one, I think we already touched upon it. It's still an obligation of states to disseminate these laws and translate them. It's a weakness. It's something that they are not doing, and we need to keep pushing them. CSOs, all stakeholders, all those who are interested. In fact, churches have a bigger role to play in that, because they are like the middleman. You push. People need to know those things.
And then to disseminate them in a way that's also child friendly. So going from a grassroots system and like embedding children's rights within education itself.
So key. Yeah, because one of the things we said, thank you for mentioning that, in schools, it should be part of the curriculum. Teaching about it's part of what they should be taught in school about their rights and all. So a few countries have started taking it up, but it's not yet broad, and we're still pushing for that, because that's the easiest place, in fact, to reach people. It's the schools, it's the churches, the religious organizations, and
is there a monitoring process?
it's part of what the CSOs are the ones that we rely on. That's why we keep on trying to broaden the network, because you see, that's where the gaps are. We don't yet have a lot of action happening on the ground. So we can only go slow with as much resources as are available, but we keep pushing and advancing it. And when more and more people see that this is important and they commit to it, and we push the states to also commit to it, we will see action. And why am I saying that? States were always complaining that, the reasons why we can't do all of these things, whether it's translation, whether it's whatever it is, monitoring on the ground, is, again, back to the argument of resources. There was a research that was conducted a few years ago with the African Child Policy Forum taking the lead. It was looking at budgeting for children, and it's become something that we do and we look at every year. And the most interesting finding for me The states that complain the most about resources, they are the richest states, and they are the ones who give the least. The poorest states budget more for children. So it's just a matter of priorities. So it was very gratifying to see that evidence, because now we use it at the committee to say, South Africa is saying, look at what they budgeted for children. So how won't there be these problems? But look at what they budgeted for. Maybe some new hall, whatever, or some contract and all of those things. So you can actually have real figures and facts to present before them to say the argument is not tenable and to get them to, to change. On the matter of when the issues are broad-based, yes, it's true. It's one area that it's a systemic problem. But one of the things we do is in the class actions, right? Where we have those cases that you don't have a particular child, you just have, this is a problem. The example of Nigeria, it's happening now. We're not using a particular child. The issue of witchcraft, children accused of witchcraft. There's an entire portion of the southern region of the country where several regions, the children, either based on where you come from or certain characteristic features or whatever, the children are accused of witchcraft and they are tortured, all manner of evil things are done. So we haven't selected one particular child because we're like, this is affecting the entire. So that matter is currently pending before the committee now. We want them to deal with it and to address the government of Nigeria and to say, what are you doing about this violation of children's rights in the name of accusing them of witchcraft? I don't know what they mean by that. So that's an example of what is done. Now, the other things they do, I mean, that's why I said it's an emerging area where there's a whole naming and shaming thing that we do in international law. You let them know that this state, the committee has gone. That's why I was mentioning investigative missions. So they're able to say, we engaged with the government. We went for a number of missions. 1, 2, 3. This was the commitment, or this was what they said they would do. After maybe 2 years, 1 year, nothing has happened. So the information is put out there, and then those who can lobby and we can push them. Remember, I mentioned a lot of the times they want to appear as respectful of human rights to their donors. So now we push such information to potential donors. Do not give them this money for whatever it is they're asking for, unless they have committed to, deal with it and address it, because now we're trying to hit them where it matters the most, because that's the language, they understand. Another thing that is done is expulsion from membership. So you'll be expelled as a member at that time. So that means whenever we're having sessions or deliberations, the government, that country cannot speak. We will still represent the people because we're not punishing the people, but the government itself for not living up, because we're like, why you are here to say what? They've given you a number of 101 recommendations, you're doing nothing about it, then you cannot sit here with us to talk about another state or to say anything. You have to first take care of your own fire in your house before you have any contribution to make to whatever we're talking about at this level. So those are some of the things that are being done now, and it's being pushed, and it's working, because really, one thing we find, states don't like to be embarrassed, but they don't like to be embarrassed, but we have to go there if that's what we have.
Are the two of you happy to share your email addresses with
Yes.
our Zoom audience?
Most definitely.
Okay, thank you, because there's a couple of people from civil society organizations that would like to be in touch with you. Let me also just say to everyone that we will be packaging the presentations and sharing them via our website. My colleague next to me, Lois Law, who runs our project on women, children and the family, will also take this further, and Lois will be the contact person for any of you who wish to get hold of the resources or make suggestions for further discussions on this. You can reach Lois at Lois, L-O-I-S, at cplo.org.za. And I'd like to ask everyone on the Zoom call also please just to take a minute to fill in the little evaluation form that we have posted in the chat box. You should all have access to it. Won't take you more than about 30 seconds, but it does help us a lot in terms of the feedback that we get from you. And I'll leave the meeting open for quite a while to enable you to do that. I'm just going to enter the email addresses of the two speakers now into the chat box as well, so you have access to them. We do have a couple of extra minutes at our disposal because our lunch is late. So if there are any other questions that people would like to pose or comments, either on Zoom or in the room, please go ahead.
A quick one
Yes.
from me. I just remember because of the contact you said some CSO members wanted. Please, just to mention again, there is a process at the African Committee, even at the UN level, where any organization which has what they call observer status with the committee, you are invited to participate in the proceedings of the committee, you are invited to send briefs and presentations about any issue you're working on, any country, whatever it is, as far as it concerns children's rights. So there is a process for that. We can also share information on that so that if, as an organization, you can apply for observer status before that committee. So whenever they are having their sessions, you will be invited. Come forward, please come share presentations and briefs with us on what you're working on, what to engage states on and all, because that's part of how they get information. They wouldn't know if we don't share the information with us. So that's very critical, especially for CSOs.
Any other points that people have? I'm just keeping it going a little bit here while I copy and paste email addresses.
Can I say one more thing?
Yes.
There is an advanced course on children's rights that we do at the UWC at the Dalaoma Institute in partnership with the Center for Child Law and the Center for Human Rights at the University of Victoria. It runs every year around this time, June and July. I know that for this year's edition, it's holding sometime next week. So if people are interested, that's a course. It usually runs for 1 week. So it gives you more detailed information on the systems. There's a day where we focus on the international system, another day for regional system, and then country-specific issues and different areas. Like this year, they'll be looking at matters of surrogacy, the climate change, and all of those things. So if you're interested in that, I can also share the information with you. I'll ask the organizers if people can still join in for the one starting next week. Otherwise, you can prepare yourself for next year's session. But I think it will be good and helpful for you to gain more knowledge on how to engage these bodies, because what is critical is we also invite members of those committees, current and past members of the UNCRS committee and the African committee to also teach in that training program.
Good. Thank you very much then to everybody, to the two speakers in particular for such wonderful presentations. We definitely are going to need to go through them again to pick up all the richness and the depth that you've shared with us. And we will do that in due course via our website and also through a paper that we will publish to try to summarize some of these discussions. But thanks very much for coming in and taking your time. And I know, Caitlyn, you traveled quite far to be here. We really appreciate that very much indeed. And your mother who brought you. It was a pleasure to have both of you here. Maria, you've been with us before, I think,
Yes.
and it's great to have had you back with us once again. We had a really good audience out on Zoom. We had 54 people at one stage joining us there, and thank you all for joining us. A lot of familiar names there, but also a lot of new names, and we had good attendance from all over our continent. Central Africa, I saw Cameroon, I saw Uganda, I saw various other countries there on the Zoom chat, and it's wonderful that we can join this way to share our concerns, but also our ideas and positive approaches to these challenges. Please do take a moment, if you haven't, to fill in that little feedback form. I'll leave it open for a little bit more, but for now, I'm going to bring the input session to a close. We here in Cape Town are going to take a break for lunch. And to all of you out there, we hope to see you again at our next webinar on children's issues. Thank you very much.